Hello, everybody. We are super excited to be here today for our At Home with Nature, Nature in Your Classroom, Sustainable Ecosystems. We're going to get started in 3 seconds, in 2 seconds, and in 1 second. We are here today, and I'm super excited to be a part of this. My name is Will Sorley. I'm an educator with the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority. And today I have some lovely colleagues with me today that are going to be talking a bit about our topic and also a larger piece of our topic within our greater communities and local communities. I have them here with me today. I have Raya and Jasmine. Do you guys want to say hello to everybody?
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today.
Hello, everybody. Raya here.
Awesome. And each of us will be diving into a topic in regards to a sustainable ecosystem. One of us will be talking about kind of our greater community and area. Another one of us will be talking about, what are some projects that are happening more locally? And how are we contributing to, a positive impact on our environment? And finally, I'll be kind of closing it off of what can we do as individuals to help and sustain the ecosystems that we live in, wherever that may be. So in this moment, before I pass it off to Jasmine, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping rules. We are on YouTube Live here today, and we're super excited to be here. If you have any questions or comments that you have about the live today, please put them in the chat. And we have a team in the background that will facilitate the questions, either answer them there, or we'll answer questions at the very end of the presentation. If there's something that needs to be answered, right then and there, that's pertinent, we will take the moment to answer it during the live. Now, make sure that we're being respectful to everybody in the chat and then also on the live stream, as we want to make sure that we're creating a communal place where we can share ideas, thoughts, and answer some really great questions as well. So Jasmine here is going to take it away, and she's got something really cool to talk about. Jasmine?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Will. So as Will mentioned, today we're talking about sustainable ecosystems here in the GTA. And I'm going to start us off by bringing us back a few hundred years. So we're going to start off with the 1800s. And this is what the Toronto waterfront kind of looked like back in the 1800s. So this is right when Europeans were beginning to settle and develop what we now know as present-day Toronto. And I want to draw your attention to the right here. You can see this large marsh. So actually, back then, the Toronto waterfront was home to Ashbridge's Marsh, which is one of the largest freshwater marshes on the north shore of Lake Ontario. So the marsh was home to birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. And it was really this amazing habitat and this amazing ecosystems for so many different native species. When we look at this picture, we can kind of think about all of the different species, all of the different wildlife that would call this space their home. But back then, the Europeans who were trying to develop and build out Toronto didn't see it as that. They saw it as space that maybe was filled with disease, that couldn't be developed on. And eventually, in the early 1900s, this space was actually completely filled in and covered up so that it could be developed on for homes and businesses. And that created what we now know kind of today as the Toronto waterfront. So all of this amazing habitat and ecosystem space was lost. We're going to fast forward now about 50 years from the beginning of the 1900s to around 1950. And this is when something called the Leslie Street Spit began to be created. So in the 1950s, Toronto expected a boom in port use, and they decided to start putting some lake fill into Lake Ontario. And this was material that came from digging out the subway tunnels, material that came from demolished buildings, so bricks and rubble and rocks, and all of that was dumped into Lake Ontario. And it was originally intended to be used for kind of port infrastructure, so for boats and for docking. Eventually, the space built out further and further, and nowadays, what it looks like is something like this. So this is actually what we call Tommy Thompson Park. So Tommy Thompson Park is on the Leslie Street Spit. And in 1975, the provincial government awarded TRCA, so Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, with the responsibility of managing this space and opening it up to the public. You can see on this map here is the Toronto waterfront. There are the Toronto Islands right here. And here is Tommy Thompson Park circled in red. So it stretches out into Lake Ontario, the southern edge of Toronto. In order to guide the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority in managing Tommy Thompson Park, a series of main objectives within a master plan was developed. And this was developed with really careful consideration and involved many, many different stakeholders. This master plan has 4 main objectives, and these are preserving significant species, protecting environmentally significant areas, enhancing aquatic and terrestrial habitats, and then finally, enhancing public recreational opportunities. So since the beginning, since 1975, Tommy Thompson Park has really been all about this balance. So ensuring that there are really strong and healthy habitats and ecosystems to be used by various species and various forms of wildlife, but then also ensuring that the space is open and accessible to all members of the public to come and visit and kind of make use of the space. One of the ways that we've worked on enhancing aquatic and terrestrial habitats is through large-scale habitat creation. So this is a space on Tommy Thompson Park, and this photograph was taken in 2001. You can see here, this is kind of a wide open space, and that's Lake Ontario there. So it's kind of free-flowing into Lake Ontario. Maybe not a lot of habitat there for a few different species. This photo was taken in 2005. So you can see some of the changes we've made. We've brought in the land a little further. We've created islands. The water level has actually risen quite a bit, so it's a lot shallower. And looking at the differences, we can kind of think of the different species that would be able to live in the habitat here on the right. So this is more of a wetland habitat or a wetland ecosystem. And we can imagine those islands and that kind of shallower water would be amazing for some of our native fish species to spawn and to seek shelter. Some of our turtles and frogs and many different species of birds would be able to use this space. Another wetland area at Tommy Thompson Park is this one. And I want to highlight this one because it was actually funded through this really cool process. And this process is called ecological compensation. So ecological compensation basically means this idea of replacing habitat or aspects of habitat that were lost due to human impact. And when we think back to what I just talked about how the spit was created, how the Leslie Street Spit or Tommy Thompson Park now was created, that was a lot of lake fill and a lot of rubble and bricks and dirt that was going into Lake Ontario. We can imagine how that might have displaced some of the native species that were living in Lake Ontario at the time, maybe some native fish species, many different types of aquatic vegetation as well. By kind of creating habitats and creating ecosystems at Tommy Thompson Park, it's a form of compensating and giving back for the spaces that were previously lost. Okay, in some of our large-scale habitat creation, we've also done some small-scale habitat creation. So creating specific structures in order to preserve specific species. And I'm going to show a few of these structures now, and I want you to think about what kind of wildlife, what kind of species might use some of these structures. So here is the first one. And we can see this is a structure that would be placed in a wetland. And the bottom part of the structure would actually be underwater right here. And then the above part might stick out above the water. So what kind of species do you think might use a structure like that? From my perspective, I think that the bottom part of the structure would be greatly used by native fish to kind of spawn and to seek shelter. The above part could be used by turtles to bask in the sun. It could also be used by various species of birds as well to perch on. Another structure we've created is this, and this is called what we call a tern raft. So terns are the birds you can see here, and they prefer to nest on an island. When they nest on land, they feel very exposed to different predators. So by creating these structures, we've successfully created a space where terns can nest year after year and where they feel comfortable. This space is quite interesting. So this is a bank or a cliff that was kind of dug out. So you can see these holes here that were created. And this one is a little trickier to guess, but this was actually created for a bird called a bank swallow. And bank swallows prefer to nest in these little holes created kind of on the side of a bank or on the side of a surface like this. Another structure we've created, which you may have seen before, are these. So this is what we will call a nest box. And the nest boxes at TTP, we have quite a few, are used by tree swallows, which are similar to bank swallows, and they look like this right here. Okay, so we've done so much work with Tommy Thompson Park in creating these successful habitats and preserving significant species, but we are of course met with quite a few challenges. And one of those challenges is invasive species. One of the invasive species we have at Tommy Thompson Park is Phragmites. And this video was taken at Tommy Thompson Park, and you can see Phragmites is this very tall reed. It usually grows in wetland ecosystems, and it grows really, really tall. And I want you to notice a few things in this video. One of the things I want you to notice is how thick it's growing. So Phragmites is really good at doing this. It's really good at growing super, super thick and not allowing any other native plant species to live in these spaces. So obviously that's a very big problem when we're trying to encourage biodiversity in the ecosystems we have here. Another invasive species that we have at Tommy Thompson Park, we don't have, but that is a threat to Tommy Thompson Park, is common carp. And you can see in this video, common carp are a type of fish, and they can really, they're very destructive in terms of aquatic habitats and aquatic ecosystems. We've actually installed these gates here to protect some of our wetland habitats. And in this video, you can see these common carp desperately trying to get into that wetland. And luckily, they're being successfully blocked out. But you can see there are just so many. And you can imagine with a smaller wetland, the kind of damage that many fish can do. Another challenge that we've dealt with at Tommy Thompson Park is how humans use the space. So like I mentioned before, it has always been a balance for TRCA in managing Tommy Thompson Park, ensuring that the species who live there feel safe, feel comfortable, and have what they need to survive and live healthy lives, but also ensuring that humans are able to access Tommy Thompson Park and use it as a place of recreation and learning and having fun. Unfortunately, sometimes the way that humans use spaces and the way that we can use our environmental spaces is not always appropriate. So one of the challenges we've dealt with is that we have a lot of snakes at Tommy Thompson Park, and these snakes love to go in the road. And although this isn't on purpose, usually it's totally by accident, a lot of the cyclists at TTP run the risk of colliding with these snakes. So one of the things we've done is install these please brake for snake signs, and we have these throughout the park. At Tommy Thompson Park, we also have some really incredible species and some really incredible wildlife that you can't see in other spaces. These are some red foxes that live at Tommy Thompson Park. Unfortunately, we deal with challenges with these species where humans don't really know how to behave around them. So we've had to install kind of fencing around these spaces. We've had to install signs asking folks not to feed wildlife. And it really is this constant balance of ensuring that people who visit Tommy Thompson Park feel safe and feel kind of amazed by the wildlife they can see, but also ensuring that our wildlife who live there can live happy lives. We also have had many successes despite these challenges. So Tommy Thompson Park is now home to many different ecosystems. We have forest ecosystems that you can see here. We have wetland ecosystems. We also have meadow ecosystems. Tommy Thompson Park has been named an environmentally significant area and an important bird area. So it really provides critical habitat for so many different species of wildlife. And of course, it provides such a unique kind of recreation opportunity for all of our park visitors. And I have here some photos of some of the wildlife that we can see that now live at Tommy Thompson Park. So we have coyotes, we have different types of snakes. This is a garter snake. We have different types of vegetation and insects. There's a little bee there, beavers, monarch butterflies, swallowtail butterflies, minks, leopard frogs, Blanding's turtles, and here are some bird eggs. And the birds at Tommy Thompson Park are incredible. We've recorded over 300 species of birds that have visited Tommy Thompson Park. This one right here is a Baltimore oriole, and that's a species of bird that actually nests here at Tommy Thompson Park. Another bird I want to talk to you about is this one right here. So this is a really special bird at Tommy Thompson Park. This is a double-crested cormorant. And double-crested cormorants have a really interesting history, and they live very interesting lives. I won't be going into kind of all of the detail about them, but I wanted to point out there is actually a webinar happening this weekend. And kind of funny, this webinar is all about birds that we love to hate. And the cormorant is one of the birds that's highlighted in this webinar. So if you're interested in learning more about this bird, then I would encourage you to check that out. What I would like to share about the cormorant today is how they nest. So at Tommy Thompson Park, we have over 14,000 cormorants that visit the park every single year. And the way they nest is actually in a colony. So they like to nest all together in one space. I would love to show you a video of the habitat of the cormorants that we have at Tommy Thompson Park today. And I want you to imagine that you're actually there and kind of witnessing that. So here we can see it is a sensitive bird area, so it is actually blocked off to members of the public. But there are some spaces where you can go right up to it and actually do the space. I know for me, when I visit the Cormorant area at Tommy Thompson Park, I mean, here are some of the noises that they make. They have a wide variety of sounds that they make. And you can see them here nesting together, building their nest and communicating with each other. Amazing. So thank you so much, Will. At Tommy Thompson Park, we really have met some challenges, but overall, we've managed to create this space kind of out of nothing in this accidental urban wilderness that is now home to so many different species. And the work that we're doing really is ongoing. So this is where we were on the map. This is Tommy Thompson Park. And now I'd love to turn it over to Raya, who's going to be speaking to you about a different space that we have here in the Greater Toronto area.
Excellent. Jasmine, before you go away, we have a question. There was a great question from Danielle Legros. And I know you've done a lot of work on Asian carps. She was wondering if you can also answer, where do the carp come from that you mentioned? So these common carp.
That's a great question. Yeah, so common carp are an invasive species. I believe they come from either Europe or Asia. They are different than the Asian carps that we have that are an invasive species to North America. Raya, do you know where they come from specifically, the common carp?
I believe they're also from parts of Asia, and they've been in Lake Ontario for over 100 years. So they're kind of viewed as normalized in Lake Ontario. But when they encounter wetlands that are along the edges of Lake Ontario, then they can be a very significant problem to those ecosystems. Yeah, it's a good question. All right, so thank you for asking that one. Any other questions that you would like to know about, you're welcome to put into the chat, and we really appreciate people being respectful in the chat. Thank you very much for that. So now that we've talked about this very large park space that is like a wilderness in Toronto, we're going to enter into more of a community space. So on this map, maybe we can pull up, Jasmine, the next spot. There we go. There is a very long hydro corridor that is being modified. So it's being modified into a healthy ecosystem called the Meadowway. You can go to the next slide there, Jasmine. So we're going to talk about creation of the Meadowway. And what's really interesting about this is as we look at this scene here, a hydro corridor, you've probably walked under them at some point or seen them. They're these long stretches of hydro lines being carried by hydro towers, right? And they're bringing electricity to communities. And we can see that in this particular habitat space, we have also then houses and schools and hospitals and all kinds of other buildings, apartment buildings. And this long stretch of green usually has turf grass at the base, like under the hydro corridors. There might be a few community gardens, maybe some fields where people play sports, but generally it's kind of a underutilized space in Toronto in many ways, ecosystem-wise. And the hydro towers themselves, the hydro corridors, this is existing infrastructure. So infrastructure meaning like if you had a building in a park, let's say there were washrooms in the park, that's existing infrastructure, or a playground is existing infrastructure. In this case, the hydro corridor is existing infrastructure in Toronto. What we're looking to do, if you change the slide there, is we are looking to convert this into a meadow, a really long meadow that stretches all the way from the Don Valley over to Rouge Park, 16 kilometers, full of native meadow plant species. And now we're talking about this terrestrial landscape. So Jasmine mentioned a lot of aquatic habitat creation. That's okay. Yep, next slide. And now we're getting into this terrestrial ecosystem and how to sustain healthy spaces in terrestrial landscapes. So you can see this before and after picture. And these are taken of the exact same spot. So we've got the same hydro posts in both pictures. And they're about 4 years apart. It takes a while to create this kind of a landscape. So we're using this infrastructure that exists, removing the turf grass, and we can go to the next slide. And it, like I said, it takes a few years, removing the grass, working with the soil to ensure the soil is ready. That can take 1.5 years itself, maybe 2 years. And then this right now in this picture is showing that seeds are going down. So there's seeding happening there of all these native wildflowers that are great for this area. Now, it's not just about the TRCA doing all this work. We're collaborating with the Hydro One, who actually owns the hydro corridor property land, and with the City of Toronto. But it's about the communities who live in this stretch of Scarborough as well, coming to help with this project and be part of it. And so we've had students growing plants in their classrooms that then get planted into the meadowway by the students themselves in non-pandemic years. And we've also had community groups come out and do mass plantings of native plants to really get these plants in the ground and ensure success of the space. So what we end up with then is this really fantastic meadow that attracts all kinds of wildlife in a hydro corridor in the middle of Toronto. And in Toronto, we have, I think it's over 400 kilometers of hydro corridor. So this is a 16-kilometer stretch that we're still working on. And the stretch I showed you that's kind of finished is about 4 kilometers. And we're in different stages at different areas along the meadowway. But it's a really fantastic project. So the next slide, we can see that we are also, just like Jasmine mentioned, we've also got some challenges. I don't know if you guys know what this plant is. If you've learned about invasive species, you might be familiar with this one. It's actually a plant that monarch butterflies sometimes mistake for milkweed and will lay their eggs on this plant. But the poor larvae, the caterpillars, they can't eat this plant. This plant takes over all kinds of spaces. It's across the GTA, in Peel, in York, in Toronto. It's called dog strangling vine. So it's a big invasive species challenge. And what we see right now is actually a test plot. We are looking at different strategies for addressing this particular invasive species. So we have challenges, we try to overcome them. And then we also have successes. We can see that there are different species of butterfly and insect using the space. Great, great, great for pollinators. There's a deer that was spotted, a young fawn, so there's clearly some breeding space there. The eggs, that's a ground nest. And if a bird finds a space to be suitable enough to actually lay their eggs in that space and create a nest, then that's a really, really good sign that the ecosystem is a success. Now, I wanted to share a little bit about something we don't often think about. So here we have that picture I showed before of the meadowway in the hydro corridor, and there's a building in the background. We can see it's really part of our urban center. And I should mention that along the entire 16-kilometer stretch, we are also constructing a multi-use path, so a bike/walking trail. So if somebody worked in downtown Toronto, but they live up near Rouge Park, they could actually bike all the way to work on this trail, and then the connecting trails in the Don Valley. And the plants also, so in the top right corner, we have an aster. It's a New England aster. And in the lower right, we have a plant called switchgrass. You can barely see it, but it is a species of native grass that we've been planting in the meadowway. And we often think about what's above ground when it comes to these plants. I would like to take you below ground for just a moment. Have a look at this image here. If we check out New England aster, it's the plant, the kind of tall plant on the left side. Look at those roots. They go down to about 2 or 2.5 meters. If we move over and look at switchgrass in the middle of the slide, those roots go down further than the plant goes up, about 3.5 meters, 3 to 3.5 meters. So super long roots. Why this is important is because when we think about ecosystems, it's not just about forests and meadows and wetlands, it's also about the soil ecosystem. And having healthy roots that reach really, really far down means a couple of things. The soil is loosened, so the soil is not super compact, and that allows for organisms to be in the soil. By having the roots grow down, that increases air spaces down there. It allows for water, rainwater to filter down. So we have experienced a few instances of flooding in the last few years. And by having more and more of these types of native species in our meadow spaces, or even in our front backyards, then we can get the water filtering further down, so it doesn't necessarily flood into our roads and flood into the lake directly, keeping that water local. It increases the cooling effect of this ecosystem. So if you think about heat waves in the summer, we have 2 weeks of intense heat. What happens to grass, or turf grass? I mean, it turns brown, right? It turns yellow. It doesn't really, isn't able to access those deep roots. So on the very left, Jasmine is showing us the turf grass roots. They're about 10 centimeters. They're really, really short, and they're not doing a lot for loosening of the soil. But these deep roots, well, these plants, in a heat wave, they can access water from deep down in the ground, bring it up, and if we think about the water cycle, through transpiration, they are letting that water back into the air, which has a cooling effect, a local cooling effect. So that's another huge benefit for people living by the meadowway. They might even notice, like, oh, it's actually cooler by the meadow because of that transpiration effect. One last thing I wanted to mention in regards to these roots and the benefits of these native plants en masse like this is that when we think about plants breathing in carbon dioxide, well, if they're breathing in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen, what is staying in the plant? Is it the carbon or the oxygen? It's the carbon. And that carbon becomes the leaves and the flowers and the roots. And by building those roots, growing those roots deep in the ground, they're actually moving carbon deep into the ground. So these plants are sequestering carbon, which is fantastic against climate change, right? It's removing carbon dioxide from the air. So I wanted to take a moment there to talk about the soil ecosystem and the role that these roots play in sustaining that, and then the impact they can have on the above ground spaces as well. But we are going to segue into, Jasmine, what's the next slide we have here? Perfect, thank you. We're going to segue into the idea of municipalities and kind of the role they play as well. So in York and in Peel, there are efforts being made definitely into sustaining healthy ecosystems. And in Toronto, we have these documents that are called City of Toronto strategies. So there's a ravine strategy, a pollinator protection strategy, and a biodiversity strategy. And these are all sort of guidelines for decisions we can make in order to protect pollinators and healthy ravines and biodiversity. And the Meadowway and Tommy Thompson Park and what we do in our own yards can all feed back into these strategies. So on that note, I am going to hand the mic over to Will, and I believe he's going to bring us down into a very local level.
Awesome. Can you hear me here, Raya?
Yes.
Perfect.
You're
I'm just
audible.
going to do this. Okay. We are going to go for a little bit of a journey, folks, and talk a bit about what Raya was mentioning and get more specific of what can we do as individuals, you know, kind of to help our local areas. We've seen kind of we can say greater scale within the city of Toronto in the creation of Tommy Thompson Park and the initiatives that are happening. We can also think about the Meadowway as well. You know, this turf grass and how we can understand that, you know, maybe it's not the best way to look at it. How can we change this actual place and, you know, make it suitable for other living things? Now, I'm here at my place, and I was just in the backyard, and we'll go check that out in a second. And I just want to mention as well, we do have a worksheet, and I'll pull up a picture in the chat later of what that looks like, and you can fill that out, of course. And if you're looking for this worksheet after the fact, you didn't know about it before, by all means, you can email us and we can send you that worksheet. But talking about just our local areas. Now, if we think about the traditional home or park place or somewhere around where a lot of us humans live, we're going to find a lot of turf grass. Now, we're going to take a look up close here at turf grass and really get to look at what living things do we see. Oh, I just turned the camera there for a second there. Apologies for that. And I'll change our camera here. So when looking at turf grass or this traditional grass, we don't really see a lot happening. I can see that there are some dandelions. Some people consider these weeds. And, you know, this one has actually started to go to seed as well. A lot of people get really angry. They put pesticides on them, which also evidently will kill a lot of the pollinators or other insects and living things. How most people will see a traditional grass like this is perfect, short, bright green grass throughout the year. And the thing about this grass or turf grass, it's a crop. It's one of the largest crops actually in North America. It takes a significant amount of water. Thinking back to the picture that Raya was talking about, it doesn't retain water that well because the roots they're so shallow. So they need to be constantly watered, which, you know, that puts a lot of pressure on a lot of our other resources. So we can look at this barren monoculture land of grass. And how can we change that? You know, just as individuals, if maybe we have a place of living. Now, we can do lots of different things. And a big one that a lot of people do is planting native gardens. Now, what I have here is just a little patch of, it was grass, but I've changed it into kind of a native plant area with some grasses and also a very special plant called milkweed. I have two types of native milkweed that are really good to have in this area. I have butterfly milkweed, and I also have another species, which is called common milkweed, an important plant that is special towards our monarch butterfly, as it only eats one type of food. Now, if we just think about, you know, the diversity, what's happening in that one patch of grass compared to what's happening there, we're going to find a lot more different species. But when we go to another area, and I'll show you just quickly my backyard, how much more diverse and how much more sustainable it is for not just the animals in the area, but also myself too. In regards to, I enjoy the gardening itself, and there's tons of other things. Now, I know this might not be possible for everybody and every place where we live, but we can look at it in regards to what can we do in our own places of living. If I live in an apartment, what can I do there? If I have maybe a little balcony, can I put plants there? And what kind of plants, native plants, might successfully grow? Such as black-eyed Susans, maybe even milkweed if I have a large enough pot or bed. And I'll turn the camera around here, and it's just evident if we plant our native species, and I'll get a close look up of something really awesome here, how we can transform just our backyards from a regular grass to a place where many animals and insects can survive. Last year, I actually had a rabbit. It had its little home here for its children. I have birds constantly in this area, skunks, groundhogs, squirrels, and you can even see here too, I do have a beehive, which is super active and helps pollinate. And in regards to other places around our area, you know, can provide some food for myself too, in regards to the form of honey. But if I just go down here and check out just some of my spots here, I can already start to tell and see signs of animals compared to the grass. I can see that something was digging in the ground here. I can see that, yes, these forget-me-nots are here. Those are the blue flowers, lightly. I can even hear and see other pollinators. It looks like a bee fly over there too. So we're going to go back and kind of look at some of the other interesting video and photos that I have of other places of living from our colleagues and how people have kind of greenified or in regards to creating a sustainable ecosystem. So I have some just flowers here. There's actually an ant inside of this one here. Over there, I actually see a honeybee inside of one of the flowers as well. And there's just so much more life here compared to, you know, the grass that was kind of boring, I'll be honest with you, that was happening in my front yard. So I'm going to change my camera back over this way. We're going to head on back. So there's a lot of different things that we can think of and that we can do just as individuals. A big thing about that is planting native species and kind of creating that habitat for them too. I'm going to place you down right here. I'm going to transfer cameras and also audio devices super quickly. Hello, Raya, can you hear me? Oh.
Yes, I can hear you. I didn't have my mic on.
Awesome. I'm just going to do this quickly. I just got to turn on my camera quick. Awesome. Okay, looks like my camera's just about to turn on here. Awesome. I'm back in the picture, everybody. And I wanted to show you just a couple other things. So our colleague Carly here who's in the chat, actually lives in a newer complex, as you can see in this image. Now, it looks pretty desolate, I'll be honest with you, right? There's not a lot of life happening, and that's due to all the construction that's happening too. But our reinvention and re-looking at buildings and how we have them and making them more sustainable is something that we really want to consider. And also, it's a lot more beneficial for us too. We can see on this building here in our image that it's actually covered in solar panels. The whole building itself is covered in solar panels wherever there is empty space. So if we think about it, right, well, that can save a lot of people a lot of money in regards to the energy that is being produced from those solar panels and not having to have a higher electricity bill. This complex as well, we can look at a couple more images here in regard to some of the surrounding homes, have solar panels on top of them. And then finally, Carly herself, when I mentioned it, if you have a balcony, she's kind of greenified or provided some type of habitat for animals in her area. Now, of course, it might not be as extensive in regards to a luscious garden, but providing something is better than nothing. And I have one more colleague, and I thank her so much for sending me this video, is Peggy. And she has a rooftop garden available to her. And she actually has this beautiful space available to her. I'm just going to make it full screen here. And in this, she's actually planted a lot of native species, as we mentioned, and she's also, in it, planted a lot of food for herself. So if we think about sustainability in regards to a larger idea and even our ecosystems, our colleague here won't have to travel to the grocery store as much as she's producing her own food. She's also providing a habitat for animals or other insects or invertebrates in the soil and then pollinating of the flowers too. And it's a beautiful setup that she has here. She built a lot of the structures herself. So it does take a bit of handiwork sometimes, but there's some great resources out there of how to develop your own little garden, either pollinator garden or some type of vegetable plot as well. So thank you to Peggy for that amazing video of her place there. Now, of course, if these things aren't available to you, there are lots of different things that we can do in our own lives. If we think about ways that we can conserve and help the environment better, I kind of think back to what are ways that active transportation can help. So when I say active transportation, I think of ways that I can walk to where I need to go. I need to bike, non-motorized way of moving around, as that will have less of an impact on the environment than maybe our driving, as it takes gasoline or other harmful methods too. So there's definitely a lot of different things that each of us can do that can help provide and better the ecosystems that we live in, to make sure in this idea of sustainability that's the same for generations to come. Because there are a lot of things that are impacting it, not just us humans, but also things in our natural world. Now I'm going to bring everybody back together here. I'm going to bring back in Raya. I'm going to bring back in Jasmine as well. And we're going to have a bit of a Q&A, I would like to say. Questions that people may have in the chat at this moment. So please pop your questions into the chat. The three of us will answer together. If it's more specific on one of the topics that we talked about, we'll dive into that more. And, at this time, if you do have to go, by all means, you may do that if you're not wanting to stick around for the questions. But I implore you to stick around. There's always some great questions that pop up in the chat, and maybe you want to learn about too. And I want to pop up quickly what the handout looks like as well, just over top of everybody's faces here. This is what it looks like. Connects to all of the topics we were talking about today. What are the native plants that we're planting? What are some of the greater projects? And, invasive species too. So I'm going to open the floor up. I'm going to kind of look at our chat here. Give me one moment. And my camera's a bit far away.
We've had a great question from Ms. Legros, which I love that last name. I don't know if that's real or not, but it's fantastic because we're talking about growing. And I think this is a really interesting question. I don't personally know the answer to it kind of on an official note, just on an anecdotal note. So the question is, have there been any significant changes noticed by the TRCA in wildlife during the pandemic? Will, do you have thoughts on that? I'm not sure if we have the official word.
I don't have any official word, but I want to say in facets of what I've heard in regards to other studies that have happened of less pollution, because there's less people just commuting within the last year to work, right? I know for us, all of us here, in regards to the stay-at-home order, we're working from home, right? So we're not having to commute to the office itself. And if we think about that on a larger scale, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, animals that may die from impacts of cars, if there's less cars on the road, we probably would see a larger surge of wildlife. Another big thing too is a lot of people are taking, charge of, are they starting gardens in their areas? Are they having more pollinator plants? So we may see these in regards to statistically speaking in the coming years when studies about this start to happen. But off the top of my head, I don't think we have anything right now in regards to stats of seeing an increase in population, other than anecdotal notes from, just determining of what's happened so far. Jasmine or Raya, if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, I would completely agree, Will. And I can mention kind of from a Tommy Thompson Park perspective as well. What we've noticed during the pandemic is a huge increase in the number of people who are getting outside, coming to visit Tommy Thompson Park and connecting with nature. And that is so amazing. I think a lot of us have found the space and time during the pandemic to really kind of engage in that connection with nature and develop that relationship. What it means, though, is that I think now more than ever, it's so important to be educating folks about how to best connect with the environment, how to treat the environment with respect. We're noticing that, that doesn't always happen at Tommy Thompson Park, like I mentioned, and with more people coming who might not know the best way to be respectful towards wildlife, that can present some issues. But I think above all, we're so happy that people are getting outside and finding this space and finding this time to make these connections with the environment, to discover some of the amazing spaces that we have here in the Greater Toronto Area.
And I'll just add on that anecdotally, I feel like I'm seeing more wildlife, but it could be just because I'm looking out my window more. So I'm like, oh, I've never seen that bird in that tree before as I'm working away. So yeah, hopefully our monitoring team at the TRCA will have some good data for us, we hope, in the next couple of years on any changes that they've seen beyond the standard trend.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of the studies after, the post-COVID world of things that have changed in many aspects of everybody's life, nature and, social. We have a question here. Bob the Orange asks, what native plant has the longest roots? And then there's a sub-question to this. Do non-native plants with long roots have the same benefits?
Excellent. So, of all the native plants in the world, native means it's specific to that area, right? I don't exactly have the answer. In Ontario, out of the ones that we are generally planting in the GTA, in the Meadoway, for instance, and other restoration sites that are terrestrial, the milkweed seems to be one of the longest ones. They can go down as common milkweed, I should say, as deep as 4 meters. I don't know about the other species of milkweed, but that's one of the very longest ones. Although there could be longer ones I'm just not aware of. And in terms of non-native plants with long roots, they can have a lot of the same benefits. However, in the case of many non-native plants, or at least the ones that are deemed invasive, one of the reasons that they're invasive and not just considered non-native is because they actually change the health of the soil ecosystem. So some of the kind of microfungus in the soil, the populations go down, or the diversity of the fungus fungal organisms in the soil is decreased. And that's an effect of some of these invasive plants. So if their roots are long, they're still having that impact, or they're having that impact even more so than if the roots are short. So that's like dog strangling vine. I've understood that garlic mustard does that as well, which can impede native plant growth. But in terms of accessing water from below and, sequestering carbon, I suppose non-native plants with long roots would do the same thing. I've never really thought about that, to be honest.
I feel like they would have the same effect in regards to grabbing that water, Raya, and being able to survive. I know garlic mustard has a pretty large taproot. It doesn't go as deep as some of the other ones for sure. And same thing with buckthorn as well. I find the root structure on that. I know it is more of a tree or shrub, I guess, but its roots are pretty deep in regards to where it can go. Yeah. Great question we have there. And thank you, Raya, for answering that as well. We have another question here. It says, what are some fruits or vegetables do you suggest to plant this time of year that are easier to garden? So I think that's kind of what is your step one guide to gardening, either in your own plot or maybe at your balcony or wherever place. Does anybody here have any suggestions? I'll go with mine first, and then we can maybe pass it around if anybody else. I love growing cucumbers. I find I love cucumbers to begin with in regards to how much versatility you can have within salads, foods themselves. It's a great food. One thing about them, they're pretty aggressive in regards to growing. You do need them to grow up on something, either a trestle or a slab of wood. But in regards to the ease of it, I just plant a seed. I have actually one growing over by my trestle over there, and just in a pot, and it will go up. And then I'll have some cucumbers later on in the year. Very easy, simple plant. I don't know if Rye or Jasmine, do you have any suggestions?
In terms of easy kind of fruits and vegetables, tomato is one that I find is very simple to grow, and it grows really fast. It's a little late to start from seed this year, but you can purchase a seedling at your local a nursery, and that's a great option. I also enjoy kale. I find that grows really, really fast and just sprouts up. If you're growing some fruits and vegetables, I would also encourage you to grow some native wildflowers as well. They're a beautiful addition to any kind of vegetable garden, and they will attract the pollinators that you need to make your fruits and vegetables healthy. So some really simple species that grow well in containers and in a garden plot and grow really fast are black-eyed Susan and common yarrow. And Raya, I don't know if you have any other native wildflowers that are really easy to grow.
Yeah, well, in the garden plot that I have the luxury of being able to grow in, it's a community garden plot. I have planted a little corner. I planted some bergamot, and first year put down a lot of roots. That was last year. This year, I'm hoping it'll shoot up some flowers to bring those pollinators in. A lot of these native plant species do that. They spend a lot of energy in the first year making those hefty roots, and the second year is when they'll get into flowering. I would add that beans, also, I have found them pretty easy to grow as far as garden beans.
And I can share really quickly, this is a milkweed that I started from seed this year, and it is just growing so large. So that's my personal achievement. I'm very excited.
Awesome. Okay, it seems like there's another question here. Are the EMFs in Meadoway a problem for people, plants, or bird life?
Okay,
EMFs.
That's a question for me, I think. So it's a good question, and it's something that when I started working with the team on the Meadoway project, I've mostly been working with students, but it's a question that I thought of as well. And there have been, as part of the project, studies have been done on kind of the impact or the quantity, the amount of EMFs that might be in the area. And they haven't, at this point, there doesn't seem to be an impact. So they're low enough that it doesn't seem to have an effect. It's one of those things that, I mean, on a personal note, I'm like, well, we don't know everything about everything. And 30 years from now, maybe we'll learn more, whether it doesn't have any effect at all, or maybe there was something we didn't realize at this time. But as far as the studies we've done so far, there hasn't been any kind of a negative impact from EMFs in the Meadoway. A really important thing to think about, though, for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Raya. And another question that we have here from Nicholas. How about the three sisters, beans, squash, and corn? Definitely tying in our Indigenous knowledge and history Canada has a ton of it as well. I know at one of our community farms up in Albion Hills, at the Albion Hills Community Farm, they actually do have the three sister plants growing in that area. I do not in my garden, but that is another one too. All these plants work off of one another to help each other grow and survive. So there are lots of opportunities to have those other plants as well. And especially, tying in. Go ahead, Raf.
I was just going to say, for those who aren't familiar with the three sisters, the idea is that they complement each other well. So the corn grows really tall, which means the bean can grow up the corn, from what I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong, to Nicholas. And the squash leaves are so huge that they can help shade the ground to keep moisture in and keep the area irrigated, I suppose, or like keep the water in the ground so it doesn't evaporate. Mm-hmm. And Nicholas, if you want to add to that knowledge, then please do.
Yeah, in regards to how you explained it, Raya, from the teachings that I've had, in regards to that, I think you're on the ball for that. Awesome. Any other questions that we may have from people? Oh, we have one here. We have, what are some plants that endanger Tommy Thompson Park?
That's a great question. Yeah. So earlier in the presentation, I did mention Phragmites, and that's a very big problem at Tommy Thompson Park. I would say the biggest plants that endanger Tommy Thompson Park are these invasive plants that we have here in Toronto. So Phragmites has posed a large threat to our wetlands, and luckily we've been successful in some areas of the park in mitigating that damage. So it involves a lot of work and a lot of planning in order to kind of remove that species from our park, because they are so invasive and they spread very, very easily. So that's a really big kind of threat that we've been trying to mitigate at Tommy Thompson Park in terms of vegetation. A few other plants that are a threat at Tommy Thompson Park are dog strangling vine, like Ryan mentioned, in the Meadoway. That's also present at Tommy Thompson Park, and we have ongoing mitigation strategies to try to remove that species from the park, and as well garlic mustard, which Will mentioned earlier, is another invasive plant that we have at the park that we're continuously trying to manage. So it really is this kind of ongoing battle between the Tommy Thompson Park that we want to see, which is biodiverse, full of native species, and full of healthy ecosystems, and these invasive plant species that continue to kind of damage and encroach on our wonderful habitats that we have here.
And I think to add on to that, and very well said, Jasmine, about these invasive species, they're not only just found in Tommy Thompson Park and impacting the land. I myself work a lot with the region of Peel, and the buckthorn is a huge issue. Phragmites is a huge issue. Dog strangling vine is a huge issue. These invasive plants are not just localized to one area. It's a huge portion of Southern Ontario. I don't want to say all of Southern Ontario, because there might be some pockets without some of these invasive species. But even here in my own backyard, I have buckthorn, garlic mustard, and dog strangling vine in my property here. So there's still a large impact on invasive species, and that battle for conservation authorities or individuals themselves to have those invasive or native plants thrive in the ecosystem that they are supposed to be living in as well. So great thing there. And we have another question here, and it is, what are some plants that are easy to manage and take care of? Some easy plants to manage and take care of. Raya, it seems like you are ready for this. And are wanting to
I just get so excited with this idea of like people who have annuals or kind of some perennials in their gardens that like to spread a little bit. Like lily of the valley is another plant that kind of spreads in gardens, and it's not easy to take care of because you have to keep toning it back. Otherwise, it's the only plant you're going to have. I don't know if it's officially considered invasive, but it's definitely a non-native aggressive plant. Easy plants to take care of are these native species that have these deep root systems. You don't need to water them so much because those root systems are so deep. So once they're established, they kind of take care of themselves. They come back year after year. There are a couple, something like evening primrose is a biennial, so it only lives for about 2 years. Year one makes the roots, year two it flowers, and then it dies. But those seeds kind of create a cycle of self like it grows on its own based on from its own seeds. So self-restoration, I guess, or regeneration. So the native plant species that are easy to take care, or plants that are easy to take care of, are these native wildflower species that are so important for pollinators anyway, and the local ecosystems and the soil ecosystems. So we've mentioned bergamot, black-eyed Susan, milkweed once it gets established. Oxeye is another great one, and cup plant is one that can kind of take over too, but it's actually got kind of a cup shape in the middle of its leaves that animals can drink out of. Yeah, so they're pretty easy once they're established, all of these native species.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Ryan. I should mention that we often hold webinars with our community learning team where we talk about different species that are amazing to garden with, either on a balcony in containers or in your backyard. So definitely check those out. Maybe we can put the link in the chat below to our events calendar. And that's a great place to go to find more in-depth conversations about getting started with gardening and growing native plants in your space.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody, for the questions. It seems like we've slowed down on the questions. But by all means, after this live stream is over, you can always type questions in the comments or email us directly, and we can hopefully answer those. If you're looking for the handout as well after the fact, please email us. Our information is in the description below of this video, and we can send that along to you if you're looking for that. We want to say thank you very much for participating in our live stream. We love the questions. I can definitely say from Jasmine, Ryan, and I, we hope you have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, everybody. Raya?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we've been focusing on these Toronto, like the Don River watershed, as I mentioned, the Rouge watershed, but in whatever region you're in, whatever watershed you're in, there are restoration efforts going on. So you can explore them out in the Humber end of things, or north of this, city of Toronto proper in York region. There are spots that you can learn more about how to kind of manage ecosystems in a sustainable way and different projects that are going on. So I encourage you to get out, explore, see what's local to you.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Well said.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.